The frontier of the galaxy was always restless. War had burned across its stars for generations, leaving behind ruins of forgotten colonies and scars on every species that lived there. Among those who survived in this harsh place were the humans, smaller, weaker compared to most other races, but bold enough to keep building, keep exploring, and keep fighting. And now, the humans had met the Velkrath. The Velkrath were nothing like ordinary alien neighbors. They stood tall, towering nearly 9 feet on average, their bodies made of dense muscle and bone that looked more like living armor than flesh. Their faces carried sharp lines, their skin a deep shade that shimmered under starlight like stone touched by fire. To other species, they were terrifying. To themselves, they were warriors born and bred, bound by ancient codes of honor. When the humans entered their territory, conflict was inevitable. Skirmishes broke out on asteroid fields, space stations, and rocky frontier worlds. For months, the fighting dragged on, bloody but indecisive. Neither side could claim victory. But then word spread. The Velkrath High Council would allow a ceasefire, but only under one condition. The condition was the link. The Velkrath believed no alliance could stand without proof of unity. To them, warriors of different kinds could never truly trust one another until they shared a bond so deep it touched their very thoughts. The link was that bond, a ritual as old as their species. Two beings, one Velkrath and one outsider, would connect their minds through an ancient neural technology. To survive the link, one needed courage, discipline, and the strength to endure. To fail meant madness or death. When the humans heard this, silence fell across their war councils. None of their soldiers had ever attempted such a thing. The Velkrath were not offering a polite exchange. They were demanding proof that humanity was not weak, not cowardly. And so, on a dusty plain under a sky split with two suns, the humans gathered. Across from them stood the Velkrath, their warriors lined in perfect ranks like living statues. Between the two armies was a circle of stone, ancient and cracked, marked with symbols that glowed faintly with energy. This was the ritual ground where the link would take place. General Ardan, the Velkrath commander, stepped forward. His voice rumbled like thunder. "Let the human warriors step forth. Let us see if one among you has the courage to join with a giant." No human moved at first. The soldiers shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between the towering figures on the other side. The Velkrath watched silently, their gazes sharp and unyielding. Even the wind seemed to stop. Every human knew what this meant. If none stepped forward, the Velkrath would call them cowards, unworthy of truce. The war would continue, and it would be brutal. Among the human soldiers stood Sergeant Elias Rourke. He was not the strongest of them. He was not the fastest nor the most decorated. But Elias had always carried a stubborn streak, a refusal to bend even when logic said to give up. He had grown up in the ruins of a colony burned by war. He had lost friends, family, and home to battles he could not stop. To him, courage was not about being fearless. It was about stepping forward even when fear screamed in your chest. As the silence dragged on, Elias felt the weight of it press down on his shoulders. He looked at his fellow soldiers, some avoided his eyes, others clenched their jaws in shame. None wanted to die in a ritual no one truly understood. But if no one stepped up, all of them would be branded weak. Elias drew in a breath. Then he stepped forward. The sound of his boots echoed across the stone circle. Murmurs rose among the humans, and even the Velkrath shifted slightly, surprised at the small, scarred man who dared to walk into the ritual ground. Elias's voice was steady when he spoke. "I will take the challenge. I will link." A ripple moved through the Velkrath ranks. Some of their warriors gave low growls of approval, while others muttered in doubt. General Ardan studied Elias for a long moment before speaking. "Bravery without strength is meaningless. Do you know what you risk, human?" "I do," Elias answered. "But I also know what happens if no one risks it. Then the war never ends. I'd rather face one trial than watch thousands die." Ardan's stern expression softened slightly as if impressed by the answer. He raised one hand, and from the Velkrath ranks stepped forward a giant unlike the others. His name was Korath. Korath was enormous even among his kind, his frame broad like a fortress wall, his presence commanding. His armor bore the marks of countless battles, and his eyes glowed faintly with the light of Velkrath biometal that had fused with his body over decades of war. Stories whispered among the Velkrath said he had slain entire enemy squads alone. Some even called him Stormbearer. a title reserved for warriors whose fury could break armies. When he stepped into the circle, the air seemed heavier. Elias felt his heart race, but he did not back down. He lifted his chin, meeting the alien giant's gaze. "This is the human who dares link?" Korath's voice was deep, each word sharp with disbelief. "He is small, fragile, he will not last." "Maybe not," Elias admitted, his voice steady. "But I'm here, and that's more than anyone else." A silence followed his words. Then unexpectedly a faint rumble came from Korath's chest. It was laughter, though low and harsh. "Very well, little soldier. If you wish to burn, then burn with me." The ritual began. Velkrath priests, robed figures carrying devices older than the war itself, placed 2 glowing helms on the ground. They were not helmets of protection, but conduits of energy that would pierce through flesh and thought, binding 2 minds together. Elias felt his stomach tighten, but he did not waver. The priests placed 1 helm on Korath's head, the other on Elias's. The moment the conduits activated, Elias felt a shock run through his skull. His vision blurred, his chest tightened, and then, suddenly, he was not alone in his own mind. He felt Korath. It was like standing at the edge of a storm. Waves of strength, fury, and discipline crashed through him, almost crushing his sense of self. He felt the weight of Korath's battles, the roar of war, the sharp edge of Velkrath pride. For a moment, Elias thought he would be drowned. His knees buckled, sweat poured down his face, and a part of him screamed to tear the helm off before it was too late. But then, deep inside, he remembered the colony he had lost. The ashes of his home, the promise he had made to himself, that he would never run again no matter how hopeless it seemed. Not yet, he told himself. Not while I still stand. With raw will, he pushed back. His thoughts flared against the storm, stubborn and sharp, refusing to vanish. For the first time, Korath felt resistance, not from another giant, not from a trained Velkrath warrior, but from a human whose strength lay not in his body, but in his unbreakable will. Inside the link, Korath's voice thundered in Elias's head. "You fight me? You, a small human? I don't fight you," Elias thought back. "I stand with you. That's the only way this works." For a long moment the storm raged. Then slowly it calmed. Korath did not lower his power, but Elias no longer drowned in it. Instead, their thoughts stood side by side, clashing, straining, but refusing to break. The priests ended the ritual. Elias staggered back, his body trembling, but he did not fall. He tore the helm away and gasped for air, his vision swimming. Across from him, Korath stood as steady as stone. Yet in the giant's eyes there was a new glimmer, respect. General Ardan spoke, his deep voice carrying across the plain. "The human survives." A cheer rose from the Velkrath ranks, low and thunderous. The humans, still stunned, began to clap and shout as well. For the first time, a human had endured the link with a Velkrath. For the first time, both sides saw the possibility of something greater than endless war. Elias Rourke stood in the center of the ritual circle, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. He had survived. He had done what no one else dared. But deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The ceremony had ended, but the bond was only beginning. Sergeant Elias Rourke stood outside the stone circle, his chest still heaving from the strain of the ritual. He could feel the echo of Korath's presence in his head even though the helms were gone. It was faint, like a whisper in the back of his mind, but it was there. He could sense the giant's thoughts, distant, heavy, and full of strange emotion. The humans clapped him on the back, cheering that he had survived. Officers congratulated him. Soldiers whispered his name like a legend. Yet Elias did not feel like a hero. His legs were weak, his hands shook, and a shadow of Korath's storm still lingered in his chest. Across the field, Korath stood tall among his people. The Velkrath giant seemed unchanged, his broad shoulders straight, his face stern. But when Elias glanced at him, their eyes met, and for the briefest second Elias felt a surge of something inside his mind. Pride, disbelief, and something heavier. Like curiosity, the link was not over. That night, both armies set camp on opposite sides of the ritual plain. Fires burned in neat rows and banners of two species fluttered in the dry wind. For the first time in months, no weapons were raised. Yet there was no peace. Suspicion lingered like smoke. Elias sat near the human fire, trying to eat a ration pack, but his thoughts kept drifting. Suddenly his hand froze. He had not spoken, Yet a voice rumbled faintly in his head. "You eat dust," Korath's voice growled deep and rough. Elias almost dropped his food. He looked across the plain where Korath sat with the Velkrath warriors. The giant was staring into the fire, unmoving, but Elias felt the voice clearly. "You can talk to me?" Elias whispered. Korath's reply was slow, cautious. "The link is not silence. It does not end with the ritual. You are in my mind. I am in yours." Elias swallowed hard. He did not know if this was blessing or curse. The link had tied him to a being larger, stronger, and far more dangerous than anything he had ever faced. He wondered if he would wake tomorrow still himself, or if Korath's storm would eventually drown him. That night, sleep was uneasy. When Elias closed his eyes, strange images flooded his dreams. He saw battles fought under alien skies, giant blades clashing, war cries shaking mountains. He saw through Korath's eyes, standing tall, striking enemies down like shadows. But he also felt emotions he did not understand: honor, pride, grief for fallen brothers. In the middle of it all, he felt Korath noticing him, aware of the small human mind sharing the storm. Morning came, and with it tension. The human commander, Colonel Mercer, summoned Elias. He stood in the command tent with maps spread across the table, officers surrounding him. His face was hard. Rourke, the link, worked. "Congratulations, but now you carry more than yourself." "That thing in your head, how much control does it have?" "None, sir," Elias said quickly. "I'm still me. Are you?" Mercer's eyes narrowed. "We can't risk you turning into a weapon for them. If you feel anything strange, anything at all, you report it." Elias clenched his jaw but nodded. He understood the fear. Still, part of him bristled. They were already treating him like a danger rather than a soldier. When Elias left the tent, a whisper brushed his thoughts. "Your leader fears you," Elias sighed. "Stay out of my head." "You cannot close it," Korath rumbled. "The link does not ask permission." Later that day, both sides held a joint gathering. Human officers and Velkrath elders sat beneath a large canopy, discussing the possibility of truce. Elias and Korath were ordered to sit nearby, watched closely by everyone. Their presence was proof that the link had succeeded, but the atmosphere was tense. Every word spoken by one side was weighed heavily by the other. Elias tried to sit quietly, but the voice of Korath broke into his mind again. "These talks are useless. Words do not end war. Only strength does," Elias whispered under his breath. "Strength doesn't build trust. It only scares people. Fear brings obedience," Korath said. "Obedience is not peace." Korath turned his head slowly, his golden eyes locking on Elias. For a long moment, neither spoke aloud, but the conversation inside their minds continued. It was a clash of belief, two worlds colliding. Their silent argument was broken when alarms suddenly blared. A scout rushed into the canopy, shouting in both human and Velkrath tongue. "Enemy sighted! Hostiles approaching the camp." Chaos erupted. Soldiers ran to grab weapons. The fragile meeting shattered. Elias felt the surge of Korath's battle fury even before the giant moved. It was like fire flooding through his veins. The link pulled at him, urging him to rise, to fight, to destroy. Elias gritted his teeth, fighting to stay calm. "Do not resist," Korath's voice thundered in his skull. "The enemy comes. Let the storm guide you." "I don't need a storm," Elias snapped. "I need a plan." The enemy descended quickly. Raiders from a rival alien faction taking advantage of the fragile truce. Blaster fire lit the horizon and war cries echoed across the plain. Elias grabbed his rifle and sprinted forward. But something was different. His movements were faster, sharper. He knew where to duck before the shots came, as if Korath's instincts guided him. He fired with precision he had never felt before. Each bullet found its mark. At the same time, Korath roared, charging like a living wall. His blade cut through enemy lines, his massive frame scattering foes like dry leaves in wind. Yet Elias was not separate from him. The link tied them together. He felt the swing of Korath's weapon as if it were his own arm. He felt the rhythm of battle, each move syncing perfectly with his. At one moment, Elias saw an enemy sniper aiming from the ridge. He shouted aloud, "Left ridge!" And before he finished, Korath turned, his blade flashing, deflecting the sniper's shot. In return, Korath pushed a thought into Elias's mind. "Move now." And Elias dropped just as an enemy raider lunged from behind. Together they fought as one. The battle was brutal but short. The raiders, unprepared for such coordination, broke and fled. Human and Velcrath soldiers stood stunned, watching Elias and Korath at the center of the field. Their movements so synchronized it looked like one warrior with two bodies. When silence finally returned, Elias lowered his rifle, panting. Korath stood beside him, his blade dripping with scorched metal, his golden eyes fixed on the horizon. Slowly, the giant looked down at Elias. "You fought well," Korath said, not in thought but aloud this time, his deep voice carrying to all. Elias met his gaze, breathless but steady. "So did you," the soldiers around them whispered. Some looked fearful, others awed. Neither species had ever seen such a thing. Later, when the fires of battle died down, both armies gathered again. But the atmosphere had changed. Where once there had been only suspicion, now there was a spark of respect. General Ardan addressed the gathering. "You see with your own eyes. A human and a Velcrath joined by the link can fight as one. This is proof." Colonel Mercer, though still wary, could not deny the result. "Perhaps, but it also shows the danger. If they turn against us, nothing will stop them." Elias heard his words but said nothing. He was too tired to argue. Inside, he still felt the echo of Korath's storm. It was not gone. It never would be. He wondered if he could live with it, or if one day it would consume him. That night, as Elias sat alone, Korath's voice entered his thoughts once more. "You doubted the storm, yet it saved you." Elias sighed. "Maybe, but it wasn't just the storm. It was both of us." Korath was silent for a long moment. Then, to Elias's surprise, the giant's voice came softer than before. "Perhaps the little soldier is right." Elias leaned back, staring at the stars. He knew this was only the beginning. The link was not just a bond. It was a test, one that would either unite two species or tear them apart, and deep inside he felt the weight of what was coming. The battlefield was silent again. The fires of the enemy raid had burned out, leaving only black smoke drifting across the horizon. Both armies, human and Velcrath, remained on edge, but there was no denying what they had seen. The link between Elias and Korath had turned the tide. Yet for Elias, victory brought little peace. The bond was stronger than before. Every time he moved, every time he thought, he felt a shadow at the edge of his mind. Korath. The giant's presence was heavy, like a constant weight pressing against him. Sometimes it was silent, but often it carried a pulse of emotions. Pride, discipline, suspicion. Elias could not block it out. At the same time, Korath felt the human inside his mind. Elias's quick thoughts, his flashes of memory, his restless questions, these were alien to him. Velcrath minds were steady, like stone carved by tradition. Human minds were quicksilver, always shifting. It unsettled him. The two were bound together, yet neither could fully trust the other. The next morning, both armies marched side by side toward the nearest fortress. It was a neutral station, half built by humans and half by Velcrath, meant to serve as a place of truce. The leaders hoped to discuss terms of alliance there. Elias walked among his squad, but every step he felt Korath's stride in his own body, as though their legs were tied by invisible chains. When he lifted his canteen to drink, he sensed Korath's disdain. "You waste time with water." Korath's voice echoed in his mind. "A true warrior endures thirst." Elias muttered under his breath. "A true fool dies of dehydration." Several soldiers glanced at him strangely. They thought he was talking to himself. Elias sighed and fell silent. That night, when camp was set, Elias tried to rest, but the moment he closed his eyes, he was pulled into visions again. This time, it was not battle. It was memory. He saw a towering Velcrath city of blackstone and firelit halls. He saw young giants standing in lines, learning the way of the sword. And he saw Korath, younger but already fierce, defeating opponent after opponent until none could stand before him. The pride in that memory was so strong that Elias almost believed it was his own. But then another feeling cut through. Loneliness. Korath, the strongest of his generation, had no equal. No one stood beside him. Elias woke with a start. He sat upright, breathing heavily. Across the campfire, Korath's golden eyes were already watching him. The giant said nothing, but Elias knew the truth. Korath had felt Elias's memories too. The next day, arguments broke out in the fortress. Human officers and Velkrath elders sat at a long table, discussing terms. But agreement was hard to reach. The humans demanded shared control of border planets. The Velkrath claimed those worlds were theirs by honor. Voices rose, fists slammed the table. In the middle of it all, Elias and Korath stood like symbols of what could be possible, or what could fail. At one point, a Velkrath elder turned to Korath. "Do you trust this human truly, or is he only a tool?" Korath's jaw tightened. "He is stubborn, reckless, but he does not break." The elder frowned. "That is not trust." Later, a human officer pulled Elias aside. "We can't rely on that giant forever. If he turns on us, you'll go down with him. Can you control him?" Elias bit back his frustration. "He's not a weapon to control. He's a soldier, same as us." The officer scoffed. "A soldier? He's a walking fortress." As the talks dragged on, tension spilled into Elias and Korath's bond. "You defend them." Korath's voice rumbled in Elias's head. "Even when they doubt you." "They're my people," Elias shot back. "I don't abandon them." "And yet you expect me to abandon mine?" "I expect you to see that this war destroys both sides." Elias's thoughts flared, sharper than he meant. The bond pulsed painfully, as if their wills clashed like steel. Elias staggered, clutching his head. Across the room, Korath stiffened, his hand gripping the table so hard it cracked. The leaders fell silent, watching. General Arden's voice was low. "The link strains. If it breaks, the truce breaks with it." That night, Elias tried to calm himself by walking the outer walls of the fortress. The stars stretched endlessly above him, cold and distant. He longed for silence, but the link never allowed it. "You are restless," Korath's voice said inside his skull. Elias closed his eyes. "Because I don't know if this will work. Our leaders only see enemies. Maybe they'll never see anything else." For a long moment, Korath did not answer. Then slowly he said, "When I was young, I stood alone. No one matched me. No one understood me. Now, in battle, you stand beside me. You do not fall. It is strange." Elias blinked, surprised. "Are you saying you respect me?" Korath gave a low rumble that might have been laughter. "Do not let it swell your small head." Before Elias could reply, alarms shattered the night. The fortress walls shook with impact. Enemy forces had returned, this time in greater numbers with heavy weapons. Sirens wailed as soldiers rushed to defend the gates. Elias grabbed his rifle and ran. Korath met him at the main gate, his massive blade gleaming. Without words, they fell into rhythm. The enemy stormed the walls with plasma cannons, forcing humans and Velkrath to fight shoulder to shoulder. But their coordination faltered. Distrust still ran deep. Squads shouted at each other, covering the wrong angles, leaving gaps in defense. Elias and Korath felt the chaos through the link. Their wills clashed again. "We strike forward," Korath thundered in Elias's head. "No, we hold the line," Elias shouted back. The pain of disagreement stabbed through both of them. But then Elias saw a squad of human soldiers pinned down under enemy fire. Without thinking, he ran toward them. "Cover me!" Elias yelled aloud. Before the words left his mouth, Korath was already moving, his giant frame shielding Elias from the storm of plasma bolts. The two fought as one again, though they had not agreed to. Instinct pulled them together, stronger than argument. Elias's rifle barked with deadly precision, each shot guided by Korath's sense of timing. Korath's blade cleaved through enemy machines, each swing informed by Elias's quick eyes spotting weak points. The pinned squad escaped cheering, but the battle raged on. At one point, Elias felt Korath's fury rising too high. The giant wanted to charge recklessly into the heart of the enemy. The urge bled into Elias, almost overwhelming his thoughts. For a second, Elias felt himself wanting the same, craving the rush of violence. No. Elias forced the thought back. That's suicide. He planted his will like a wall. To his shock, Korath slowed. The storm hesitated. For the first time, the giant yielded. Your way holds, Korath admitted grudgingly. Together, they pulled the defenders into a tighter formation. Humans and Velkrath began to match their moves, slowly sinking with the unlikely pair at the front. The fortress, once divided, now fought as one. Hours later, the enemy broke. Smoke cleared. Bodies and machines lay scattered outside the gates. Exhausted soldiers raised tired cheers. Elias leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. Korath stood beside him, his armor scorched, his chest rising like a mountain after storm. Their eyes met, and for once no clash passed between them. You are stubborn, Korath said aloud, his voice rough. Elias managed a tired smile. So are you. The silence between them was different now, not empty, but heavy with unspoken respect. When dawn rose, the leaders of both armies gathered again. The fortress still smoked from battle, but their tones had shifted. General Ardon looked at Korath, then at Elias. The link did not break, even under fire. Instead, it grew stronger. Perhaps there is hope. Colonel Mercer nodded reluctantly. Hope? If we can keep them from tearing each other apart? Elias stood silent, but inside he felt something new. The link was still a storm, still dangerous. But for the first time, he believed it could be controlled, not by one will dominating the other, but by both standing side by side. Korath's voice came quietly in his mind. You do not fall. Perhaps you never will. Elias straightened, his jaw firm. Not while there's a fight worth standing for. And so the clash of wills did not end in destruction. Instead, it became the foundation of something greater. Two warriors, one small and one towering, bound not by obedience but by the hard road of struggle. The war was far from over, but in the ashes of battle a new bond had begun to take shape. The fortress walls were still black with smoke when the sun rose over the horizon. Human banners and Velkrath standards waved side by side above the gates, but the air between the two armies remained heavy. The battle had ended, yet the deeper war, of distrust and pride, still burned quietly beneath the surface. Elias Rourke felt that weight more than anyone. He sat at the edge of the fortress courtyard, his helmet resting beside him, sweat still drying on his brow. Every muscle in his body ached from the long night, yet his mind refused to rest. The link had carried him through the battle, guiding his hands, sharpening his instincts, but it had also nearly drowned him again in the storm of Korath's rage. Now with the danger past, he felt Korath's presence in his thoughts. Calmer, but constant. It was like sharing his skull with thunderclouds. You think too much, Korath's voice rumbled in his head. Elias sighed. And you think too little. A low growl echoed across their bond, but it was not anger. It was something closer to amusement. That morning, both leaders summoned their warriors to the main hall of the fortress. The chamber was vast, its walls built of stone and alloy, banners of both species hanging from high beams. Humans in their fatigue stood on one side, Velkrath in their dark armor on the other. Between them sat the commanders, their faces hard. General Ardon of the Velkrath spoke first. His deep voice carried across the hall. The link between Korath and this human soldier has proven strong. Strong enough to hold under fire, strong enough to protect this fortress. This is proof that our species may yet fight as one. A murmur rose among the Velkrath ranks, some voices of agreement, others of doubt. Colonel Mercer stood next, his sharp eyes cutting across the chamber. Proof, yes, but let us not blind ourselves. A single bond does not erase years of blood. The Velkrath ways are harsh, their warriors unpredictable. If we tie ourselves too closely to them, we may lose what makes us human. The hall filled with whispers. On both sides, suspicion grew again. Ardon slammed a fist against the table. Without trust, there is no alliance. Mercer's jaw tightened. Without caution, there is no survival. Elias felt the tension like a rope pulled too tight. His gaze drifted to Korath, who stood tall and silent beside Ardon. The giant's golden eyes flickered toward Elias, and for a moment their thoughts brushed. They will tear this alliance apart before it even begins. Elias thought bitterly. Then it falls to us to hold it. Korath answered. Elias almost laughed at the irony. The smallest soldier and the largest warrior bound together, expected to carry the hopes of two species. Days passed inside the fortress, and the divide only deepened. Humans and Velcrath lived in separate quarters. They ate apart, trained apart, and spoke only when ordered to. Tension sparked in small ways. Arguments in the mess hall, harsh words at the gates, challenges in the training yard. One afternoon, Elias found himself walking past a group of Velcrath warriors. Their eyes followed him with open disdain. One of them, taller even than most, stepped forward. "You are the human who links with Korath?" The warrior asked, his tone sharp. Elias stopped. "That's me," the warrior sneered. "Then you are his weakness. His chain. Without you, he would be free." Elias clenched his fist but forced his voice calm. "Without me, he'd be dead. So would half of you." A low growl rose from the Velcrath warriors, but before it could escalate, a shadow fell across them. Korath had arrived. The giant's presence silenced the group at once. His gaze swept over them like a blade. "You speak of weakness?" His voice was cold. "This human stood in battle when others cowered. He fought beside me when others faltered. He is no weakness. He is my equal." Gasps rippled through the Velcrath ranks. To call a human equal was unheard of. But Korath's tone left no room for challenge. The warriors stepped back, silent. Elias stared up at Korath, surprised. He had not expected such defense. Their eyes met, and across the link came a pulse of emotion Elias had never felt before from the giant. Respect. True and unguarded. But not everyone welcomed this shift. That evening, Colonel Mercer pulled Elias aside into a quiet chamber. The commander's face was stern, his voice low. "Do not let their praise fool you, Rourke. They'll use you. They'll use this bond to twist us, to make us like them. Already I hear men saying you fight like a Velcrath, that you've started to think like one. That worries me." Elias met his gaze steadily. "Maybe they should stop worrying about how I think and start noticing that I saved their lives." Mercer's eyes narrowed. "Watch yourself, Sergeant. You may believe you've gained their respect, but you're losing ours." Elias left the chamber with anger burning in his chest. He had risked everything, endured storms inside his mind, fought battles others could not, and still his own people doubted him. Korath's voice stirred in his thoughts. "Your commander distrusts you." Elias rubbed his temples. "So do some of your people. We're both stuck between walls. Then we break them," Korath said simply. The chance came sooner than expected. 2 days later, a convoy of supplies arrived at the fortress, human transports guarded by Velcrath escorts. But halfway through unloading, shouts rose. A fight had broken out between human soldiers and Velcrath warriors. Elias rushed to the courtyard, Korath beside him. The scene was chaos. Humans and Velcrath shoving, shouting, some already throwing punches. A spark had ignited, and it threatened to set the fragile truce on fire. "Stop," Elias shouted, pushing through. No one listened. Korath roared, his voice booming across the courtyard. The sound froze both sides in place. All eyes turned toward the giant and the human standing side by side. Elias stepped forward, his voice carrying. "Is this what you want? To tear each other apart while the real enemy waits out there? You think fists and insults prove strength? Strength is standing together even when it's hard." Murmurs spread, uncertain but thoughtful. Then Korath spoke, his tone like stone striking iron. "This human speaks truth. He is not Velcrath, yet he stands as I do. You call him weak, yet he bears the storm. You call him small, yet he carries the weight of 2 worlds. If you cannot see that, then it is not he who is weak, it is you." The courtyard fell silent. Slowly, grudgingly, both sides backed down. The fight ended not with fists, but with words. Elias exhaled, his heart racing. Korath glanced at him, and across the link came a wave of shared relief. That night, for the first time, humans and Velcrath shared a meal together in the great hall. It was awkward, full of long silences and wary glances. But it was a start. Elias sat across from Korath, eating stew that tasted like burned iron. He grimaced. "Your food is terrible," Korath rumbled with laughter, startling those nearby. "Yours tastes like dust. Perhaps together we might cook something edible." The hall erupted with cautious chuckles. For the first time, walls cracked. But even as barriers began to break, danger lingered outside. Scouts reported enemy movements on the horizon, larger forces gathering, preparing for a true assault. The small raids were only tests. A storm was coming. In the command chamber, General Arden and Colonel Mercer studied the reports. "They mean to strike soon," Arden said grimly. Mercer nodded. "And when they do, we'll see if this alliance truly holds." Elias stood near the map, Korath looming behind him. The weight of expectation settled on them again. "Then we'd better make sure it does," Elias said firmly. Korath's golden eyes glowed in agreement. Later, in the quiet of night, Elias stood on the fortress wall. The stars stretched wide above, silent witnesses to all that had passed. He felt the link pulse softly inside him, not as stormy as before, but steady, almost like a heartbeat. "You are changing," Korath's voice said. "So are you," Elias replied. Korath was silent for a long time. Then softly he said, "Perhaps that is not weakness. Perhaps it is strength." Elias smiled faintly, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon where the enemy gathered. The barriers were breaking, but the hardest test was still ahead, and when it came, he knew they would stand side by side or fall together. The night was heavy with silence. The fortress walls stood tall, but every soldier inside knew that soon the real storm would come. For days, scouts had reported movements on the horizon, enemy banners gathering like thunderclouds, their machines grinding toward the valley. Elias Rourke stood on the watchtower, staring into the dark distance. He could not see the enemy yet, but he could feel them, the way sailors sense a storm before the first drop of rain. His body was tense, his breath steady. Inside his mind, the link hummed with energy. Korath was awake too. "You cannot sleep," the giant's voice rumbled across their bond. Elias gave a tired smile. "Neither can you. We are bound," Korath said. "Your unrest is mine." They shared a silence for a moment, both watching the horizon. Finally, Elias whispered, "Tomorrow decides everything." "Yes," Korath agreed. "Tomorrow we prove whether this bond is strength or nothing." At dawn, the fortress awoke to the sound of horns. The enemy had arrived. From the walls, soldiers looked out and saw the valley filled with enemy forces, endless ranks of armored beasts, war machines rolling forward, banners like black fire. It was a sea of steel and shadows stretching farther than eyes could see. Fear spread quickly among the humans and Velkrath. Whispers of doubt passed through the ranks. Some asked if the fortress could hold. Others wondered if their alliance would shatter under such pressure. General Arden and Colonel Mercer stood together on the command tower. Their faces were grim, but both looked toward Elias and Korath, who stood side by side below. "They must lead," Arden said. Mercer hesitated, then nodded. "Agreed. If anyone can unite them, it's those two." Before the battle began, Elias and Korath walked into the courtyard where humans and Velkrath had gathered. Every soldier's eyes turned to them. The silence was heavy, expectant. Elias stepped forward first. His voice rang out clear and strong. "We stand at the edge of history. The enemy wants us divided. They want us afraid. But we are not divided anymore. Today we fight as one." The humans stirred, their faces lifting with hope. Then Korath spoke, his deep voice shaking the air. "Strength is not in size. Strength is not in blood. Strength is in standing shoulder to shoulder. This human is my brother. His fight is my fight. Today, his people are my people. And together, we will not fall." A roar of approval rose, first from Velkrath throats, then from human voices, blending until the sound shook the fortress itself. For the first time, the armies did not stand apart. They stood together. The enemy attacked at noon. The first wave came like a crashing tide, armored beasts charging, weapons blazing. Arrows and energy bolts filled the sky. The fortress shook as machines slammed against its gates. Elias and Korath fought at the front lines, their bond blazing brighter than ever. Elias guided their strategy, shouting commands, moving with speed and precision. Korath unleashed raw power, his massive frame cutting through enemy lines like a living storm. Where Elias's mind faltered, Korath steadied him. Where Korath's rage threatened to blind him, Elias calmed him. Together they became something greater than either alone. The soldiers saw it. They followed their lead. Humans and Velkrath fought side by side, shields locking, weapons striking in unison. The enemy pressed hard, but the united army pushed back. Hours passed, and the battle raged on. Smoke filled the air, screams and roars echoing through the valley. The enemy's machines tore at the fortress walls. but the defenders refused to break. At one point, the gates shuddered under the force of a massive battering ram. The iron doors bent inward. Panic rippled through the ranks. Elias felt fear spike in his chest, but through the link, he also felt Korath's iron will. "We hold," Korath growled. Elias shouted, "With me," and charged forward with Korath at his side. Together they reached the gates just as the enemy broke through. The clash was brutal. Enemy soldiers flooded in, dark armor glinting. But Elias and Korath stood like a wall. Korath's massive blade swept through foes like grass, while Elias darted between strikes, cutting down enemies with speed and precision. Their movements were not separate anymore. They were one rhythm, one force. Behind them, humans and Velkrath surged, rallying to their cry. The breach was sealed with blood and steel. As the sun began to set, the enemy unleashed their final weapon, a towering war machine, larger than the fortress walls, armed with cannons that spat fire and destruction. Each blast shook the ground, tearing holes in defenses. Fear struck again, but Elias and Korath did not waver. "This is ours," Elias said through gritted teeth. "Yes," Korath answered. Together, they sprinted across the battlefield, cutting a path through waves of enemies. Every soldier saw them, and hope burned brighter. Humans and Velkrath pushed forward, clearing the way. At the base of the war machine, Elias and Korath stood shoulder to knee with the giant construct. Its cannons turned, aiming to crush them. Elias shouted, "Now!" Korath lifted Elias onto his shoulders, and with a powerful leap, the human soldier climbed the machine's armor. Bullets and beams whizzed past, but Elias kept moving, guided by Korath's steady will. At the same time, Korath hacked at the machine's legs, his massive blade cleaving steel. Finally, Elias reached the top. He planted explosives at the machine's core and shouted into the link, "Jump!" Korath hurled himself back as Elias leapt from the top. Together they landed hard, rolling across the ground. A moment later, the war machine exploded in a storm of fire and metal. The battlefield shook. The enemy's advance faltered. Their morale broke. Cheers erupted from the fortress. Humans and Velkrath alike roared in triumph. By nightfall, the enemy retreated. Smoke drifted over the valley, lit by the glow of burning wreckage. The fortress still stood. The alliance had held. In the courtyard, exhausted soldiers gathered. Many were wounded, but their eyes shone with victory. For the first time, humans and Velkrath celebrated together, sharing laughter, food, and stories. Elias sat at the center, weary but proud. Beside him, Korath loomed tall, his golden eyes softer than ever. "You fought well," Elias said quietly. Korath rumbled with deep laughter. "As did you. Without you, I am Storm without direction. With you, I am more." Elias smiled. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing." For a moment, silence stretched between them, but it was not empty. It was full of respect, of trust, of something deeper than either had expected when they first linked. The next morning, General Arden and Colonel Mercer stood before the assembled armies. Arden raised his voice. "Yesterday we were two peoples. Today we are one, and it is because of these two warriors." He gestured to Elias and Korath. Mercer stepped forward. His tone was firm, but there was no doubt in his eyes anymore. "I doubted this bond. I doubted this soldier. I was wrong. Elias Rourke has shown what humanity can be, and together with Korath he has shown us what we all can be." The armies roared with approval. Korath turned toward Elias and in front of all bowed his massive head. "Brother." Elias placed a hand on the giant's arm, meeting his gaze. "Brother." The word carried across the courtyard, louder than any horn, stronger than any weapon. Two species had been bound by battle, by courage, by trust, and at the heart of it all stood a single human soldier who had dared to link with a giant. That night, as stars filled the sky, Elias stood on the wall again. The war was not over. The galaxy still burned, but now he did not feel small against its vastness. Korath joined him, silent at first. Then he said, "The storm will come again." Elias nodded. "Then we'll face it together." Side by side, human and giant looked out at the horizon. For the first time, the future did not seem so impossible, because they had proven that courage could build a bridge where nothing else could, because they had proven that barriers could break, because they had proven that, even in the darkest storm, humanity stands,